Remakes. It's always seemed to be getting in our media today. First, it was in movies, but in recent years, it's become an increasingly popular trend to do them for video games as well. Though, in defense of video games, there are many times I think they actually deserve them. Unlike video games, movies you can watch whether it was released today or 45 years ago. And while age definitely shows, it does not impact the experience nearly as much. With video games, in significantly shorter amounts of time, I'd argue they become outdated much quicker because not only do you have to readjust your perception of the audio design, visuals, and the resolution, if not remastered, but you also, more importantly, have to with the playstyle and controls. Though, I do not believe this is much of a barrier if you grew up with a particular game because you had already grown used to it. So, for me, while I thoroughly enjoyed revisiting the Ezio collection last year, giving me a massive wave of nostalgia, I could see that these games, even remastered, started feeling dated, even as someone who had played them before. So while I do not know this for sure, I could definitely understand if someone had a hard time adjusting to those older mechanics, especially if they've played more modern games. This does not mean, however, that older games should be neglected nor played. I'm simply stating that remakes aren't as bad as they may seem. In fact, I actually, in some cases, will heavily advocate for them. As someone who had never played any of the original Resident Evil games growing up, with the exception of Resident Evil 6, the remakes brought a new life to them that would otherwise not be experienced by a lot of people. With all new gameplay, cutscenes, and voice acting all running beautifully in the RE engine, it reignited my love for the series. And although Resident Evil 4, in my opinion, is still a fantastic game and quite playable as far as games from 2005 go, it definitely was quite a steep hill trying to get used to its tank controls that initially really ruined my immersion. I spent way longer in the first village than I was actually meant to, and immersion is especially important in video games because it determines whether or not you're about to commit to the next 15 to 20 hours of the game, or however long the game is that you're playing. This is precisely why I am extremely hyped for the remake next year, so much so that this is probably my most anticipated game next year, tied with the next game I'm about to address, only next to the sequel to Breath of the Wild. The story here will of course have some unique story elements, but still remain the same at its core, probably much like the last two remakes, so I don't think there's much of a cause for concern regarding how they will treat the legacy of the original. And for argument's sake, even if they somehow do, the original is still well preserved and can be revisited at any time, for those who still deem it not outdated. Much like Resident Evil, the Final Fantasy VII Remake is a complete reimagining of the original, except it takes it much further. The gameplay and visual overhaul compared to the Resident Evil remakes are far greater as the time between them is as well. It went from a turn-based strategy game with no voice acting to a real-time combat game with much more expansive content and full voice acting. This expansive content adds so much more depth to the base game and its characters, but also has DLC and two whole other games attached to it, one of which is releasing next year. The story of both the original and this remake, and hopefully the rest of the trilogy as well, is phenomenally done. But when comparing them, the remake is definitely quite a massive departure here. This doesn't mean it's necessarily bad, it just means it's different. And it is this remake's changes that also piqued my curiosity and made me interested enough to go back and experience the original game, the spin-off, and the animated film, and see how the story and its characters developed over time. The Last of Us Part 1, releasing this September, is probably one of the hardest remakes to justify, and initially, when the leaks and rumors first surfaced, I was quite against this. The Last of Us still holds up very well, and does not feel outdated at all. Why? Because it isn't even a decade old, and the remaster that was released just a year after on PS4, which is already a part of the PlayStation Plus collection, is more than serviceable. However, my perspective has somewhat shifted. I still do not believe we needed this remake at all, but I still do think it is a nice thing for some people to have. This remake isn't for everyone, and I probably wouldn't recommend it to most people. It's for those who haven't experienced the first one and want to play the definitive version of the game to have a smoother transition into Part 2, and for those who deeply love The Last of Us and simply want to re-experience it in its full glory. Still though, the $70 price tag is quite steep, and I completely understand the frustration towards it. If they had remade it perhaps just a few years from now, then I think it would make a lot more sense. The Demon's Souls remake from Bluepoint was also $70, but it was excellent, and the difference between its original and remake was 11 years, so perhaps then the original game would then feel outdated, but only time will tell. But then again, perhaps it already is outdated, and it's just a case of me wearing nostalgia goggles and being used to that sort of experience, like with Assassin's Creed. But either way, it definitely isn't for everyone, and for those who decide to pick it up, I think we'll definitely enjoy it. A genre that has suddenly seen a massive resurgence, as it has been brushed under the rug for quite some time, is a sci-fi survival horror genre. So, to have games like Returnal, The Callisto Protocol, and Fort Solis, it makes sense to also include remakes of games that define the genre itself, with Dead Space and System Shock. The argument could be made that Dead Space isn't very necessary, and while it technically isn't, especially with the Callisto Protocol already being its spiritual successor, I'm just glad to have the franchise revived in some way. Will it be as good, even though it's still attached to EA and the original dev team is now working on Callisto? Maybe. Could it be worse? Also maybe. A lot of people never had the chance to experience any of these games, so to see these games and the genre in general all come back in some fashion, with updated graphical fidelity, gameplay, lighting, textures, it all makes sense, and I'm actually quite glad to see them happening. So while remakes are all the rage these days and seem to be overdone to some, remakes are actually quite necessary in a lot of cases. But even in some of the ones that aren't, still benefit from being able to play them in a more modern and accessible way. They may be needed to improve vastly on a far outdated game, or simply reimagine a story and gameplay elements, or to revive a franchise that's been long left in the dust.